大家好. Okay, so this week we're going to talk about, instead of a topic, we're going to talk about a pretty exciting person, historic figure, Shu-Wen, also known as the God of Spear. Shu-Wen is a very famous or infamous historic figure within the BajiShu history, the existence of BajiShu. He was considered one of the best BajiShu fighter in the history of BajiShu. And I am talking about him because he is considered my great grandmaster. The way he trained, the way he sees BajiShu or trained in BajiShu influence heavily into our BajiShu today. So Shu-Wen was, I would share what I know. I mean, obviously, I believe a lot of you heard of this guy and look into this guy. So he's also being made into video game characters in Japan or manga. So he is a special individual, and I will share with you what I know about him from whether from my teacher or from my grandmaster Liu Yunqiao, who was his direct disciple. So, and also a lot of the things that I will be mentioning were actually documented in the Changxianzhi, which is the Changzhou, the Chang's County government record. Only because Shu-Wen was such a significant historic figure from Changzhou, so his life and also his stories were documented in the official documentation in the government. So Shu-Wen, he was born in 1862, and he lived all the way till 1934. And from the nickname God of Spear, he must be good at the art of spear. And the spear that we were talking about is daqiang, or we call it liuheqiang. It's about over 3 meters long, and the base of the spear is about 2 inches in diameter. So it's quite big and heavy. And in the previous episode, I talked about many of the northern Chinese martial art styles were evolved from daqiang. Daqiang was a battlefield weapon, very, very powerful. And BajiShu was, has a lot of the resemblance of this weapon. And Shu-Wen, he was not a very big guy, right? Instead, he's very short. He's about maybe equivalent to about 150 centimeter high, tall. About 5 foot tall, but he was known to be super strong. And whether it's born with a lot of power or very strong, or through his very rigorous training method. And the nickname God of Spear came from, obviously, his amazing skills in daqiang. And we're talking about this such a long weapon, and he was able to kill flies. If there are flies flying against the wall, he's able to use his daqiang to kill the flies without leaving any marks on the wall. And also, when he tried to demonstrate his skill to a government official, he would put white powders on the tip of his daqiang, and he would say, "Are you ready?" And then the next thing he knows, like, "All right, check your nose." And the government official would touch his nose. He's got the white powder on his nose. And seemingly, Shu-Wen basically didn't even make a move. But essentially, he really quickly thrust his spears and put the powder on his nose without him feeling it. And obviously, these are things that are stories that are a bit exaggerated. But no doubt, Shu-Wen was extremely skillful in the art of spear. Shu-Wen was so famous or infamous because throughout his lifetime, he has countless of duels, battles, or challenges obviously he was so good that if anyone wants to become famous, taking a shortcut would to beat him. So you can imagine the amount of challenges that he got. But throughout his lifetime, he was never defeated, not even once. And whether it's empty-handed or with the weapon fighting, he never lost. And this is all because of his 功力, right? So 功力 means precision and power. I'll probably talk about this terminology in another episode. So his 功力, he really specifically heavily emphasized on his 功力 training. And he used to travel between township to township, just doing 马步冲锤. Those of you who learn from me, you know we do a lot of 马步冲锤. 马步冲锤 essentially is you're in a horse stance position with a punch, and you basically take another step-by-step strides, remaining this 马步 structure. So essentially you're squatting and walking. And Li Shu-Wen basically trained himself doing daily 马步冲锤 from town to town. And some of my students, you guys do about 15 minutes of 马步冲锤, which is about, 300 steps. And it's quite a short fall short from what Li Shu-Wen used to do. So we need to amp up our training. And 马步冲锤 is a very good core training treasure that we have. That was basically from influence from Li Shu-Wen's training method. And that is something that we need to pay more effort into. From that kind of training, you can tell that this guy was kind of a maniac. That when he trained himself, he was basically just go all in. Why? Because when he was born in a not a wealthy family, but really poor family. So at the time, China was very chaotic, very poor, and a lot of the parents would sell their kids to learn a skill, so they can have a better life. So they sold him to a equivalent of an opera band. So it's a Chinese opera. It's a sort of a theatrical art of in the Chinese culture. So they sold Li Shu-Wen to the band, and because Li Shu-Wen wasn't a good-looking kid, and he was tiny, so they can only train him to become a clown, 丑角, right? 武丑. So it's a character, specific character within the theatrical scene that typically do a lot of the comical effect, or does a lot of stunts or flips. Basically, a clown. So in order to perform as a clown, you can think that the training was behind it was pretty demanding, and he was beaten when he was a kid when he couldn't reach a certain performance. So his band leader would probably beat him up, and so accumulative, he would have a very traumatic childhood. So throughout his lifetime, whenever he sees a Chinese opera performance, he would just turn his head away, and he would never basically enjoy or watch a Chinese opera performance. And through that kind of a traumatic childhood, and also he got into BajiShu and learning from Huang Sihai, Zhang Jingxing. So these are very famous masters, and also he learned Baji Pigua. And through rigorous training, he became really, really good. Not just because of the precision and power, the skillfulness, but also his merciless, right? So he also had a nickname of the No Mercy Li, right? So he gives his opponents no mercy. Oftentimes, he would permanently injure his opponent or even kill them. So over time, he accumulates a lot of enemies. So even these challengers who were killed by him or permanently, disabled their leg or arm, his family or their disciple will want to take vengeance. So over time, Li Shu-Wen became a bit of frantic to always thinking someone is gonna, do harm to him, take vengeance. So when he enters a room or a house, even going back to his own house, he would oftentimes enter the room through the window instead of walking through the door because he think people would ambush him from behind the door. So things like this, or when he goes to a restaurant or a big hall or room, he would choose a room. He would basically choose the seat that is all the way in the back against the wall. So from that vantage point, he can see the entire room, whoever enters or leaves. So just things like that basically gives you a little bit of an idea how, like, what kind of, sort of an insecure life that he lived in, despite being so good in his art. So when he traveled to places, he respect his weapon. Like some of you would, whoever practice Japanese martial art, especially the weapons, the Japanese martial artists really respect their weapons. Shu-Wen did the same thing. I mean, generally in Chinese martial art, we respect our weapons as well. But Shu-Wen, wherever he goes, whether his disciple carry the daqiang for him or he just usually wherever he stopped or settled, he would basically put his daqiang against a wall. He would pay his respect. He'd actually pray and pay the respect to the weapon first before he eats or do whatever he's there to do. So he respects the weapon so much, and we can see that if someone respects the weapon so much, he's really dedicated to the weapon training. When Shu-Wen was about 60s, in his early 60s, that's when he was hired by the Liu's family. Liu mean the Liu Yunqiao, who was my grandmaster Liu Yunqiao. So Liu Yunqiao was only 8 years old, and his family hired, was wealthy. They have generations of scholars and working in the government. So they were able to hire the best Li Shu-Wen to the family and lived there daily to train Liu Yunqiao for 10 years, from 8 years old to 18 years old. And when Liu Yunqiao reached 18 years old, at the time, 10 years, basically Liu Yunqiao was already at a very high level in BajiShu. And Li Shu-Wen basically took him around the Shandong province to test his skills. And very quickly, Liu Yunqiao was also undefeated and earned a title of the mighty little king of Shandong. And when they traveled around Shandong, they rested and stayed at one of Li Shu-Wen's military track disciples' home. Zhang Xiangwu was a general. At the time, it was very chaotic time in China, and Zhang Xiangwu was one of the generals of a certain warlord or whatnot. And all these warlords were basically fought to hire Li Shu-Wen to train their army. And when they stayed at General Zhang Xiangwu's home, Zhang Xiangwu was introduced to his new little kung fu brother, Liu Yunqiao. And they were talking about martial art. He was showing him some stuff that he knows. Zhang Xiangwu was already a really established swordsman, right? Prior to learning BajiShu from Li Shu-Wen. So Zhang Xiangwu was teaching this little kung fu brother of his Kung Wu Jian. So Kung Wu Jian is a Wudang lineage jian, Chinese sword. And Li Shu-Wen passed by, and he was like, "What is this you're teaching the young Liu Yunqiao?" And Zhang Xiangwu was saying, "This is Kung Wu Jian. This is the Wudang, blah blah blah." And then Li Shu-Wen said, "Oh yeah, let me test you." So he picked up a tree branch and essentially attack however you want. And every time Zhang Xiangwu attempt to attack, the next thing he knows, his sword got knocked out of his hand. And then he was basically really shocked and amazed and asked his master, Li Shu-Wen, "What is this jianfa? What is this sword skill that you use?" And Li Shu-Wen just laughed and basically say, "This is Baji Jian." But the truth is, there's no such thing as 八极剑. So what Li Shu-Wen did was basically he utilized his the spear techniques into this tree branch. And later on, that sort of the integration of 八极拳 and 六合枪 was integrated into 空无剑. So we call it 八极剑, and that's still being taught in our system. So something pretty interesting. And Li Shu-Wen also was 结拜兄弟. 结拜兄弟 basically means they are bonded brotherhood, just like 拜师, right? So when you 拜师, go through a ceremony to basically take someone as your teacher, as your 师傅. So 结拜兄弟 is basically similar concept, but you basically bonded with other peers to be brother. So Li Shu-Wen was brotherhood with Li Ruidong, who was a really famous Shaolin master. Also Li Chunyi. Also, some of you who practice 形意拳, you know this name. It's a big name. So Li Chunyi, Li Ruidong, and Li Shu-Wen, they are basically 结拜兄弟, they're brothers. And something interesting was that Li Ruidong has a 金刚八式. 金刚八式 is very commonly pass around 八极拳 basic fundamental drills. And in any lineages, you can see 金刚八式. It's basically 8 drill sets. And every lineage uses this as an elementary foundation training material. And Li Shu-Wen, being as good as he was willing to trade a 金刚八式, the same thing, from his brother Li Ruidong. Essentially, this version of 金刚八式 was special. And we have it in our system, but we treat it as our highest level, material. Only the senior coaches get to learn this. And Li Shu-Wen basically traded his knowledge with Li Ruidong. So being as good as he was, he's willing to trade his knowledge and skills with Li Ruidong for this so-called elementary drill sets. You can see that Li Ruidong's version of 金刚八式 was special. And the way we train with it is also special. It's not 八极拳. So it is from a different system. So, it doesn't really interfere your 八极拳's training. So, but then it does enhance it. It has a lot of internal training and aspect that can enhance it. Li Shu-Wen has about 20 disciples on record. Like I said, he through the record, through formal ceremony, 拜师 ceremony, he had about 20 disciples. And out of these 20 disciples, they are all very famous. Whether they are famous generals at the time or they are famous bodyguards. So say to name a few, Ho Dienge. Ho Dienge was Li Shu-Wen's eldest disciple. He was the bodyguard of the last emperor of China, Pu Yi. And to be the bodyguard of the last of a Chinese emperor, that's kind of a big deal. And not to mention my grandmaster Liu Yunqiao, he was the head of bodyguard trainer for Chiang Kai-shek. And Chiang Kai-shek and Mao Zedong they were rivals. And Chiang Kai-shek was not, at the time, Chiang Kai-shek and Mao Zedong, they were fighting at war. So there were constantly, obviously, a lot of assassination attempts. So Liu Yunqiao was approved and trusted by Chiang Kai-shek to be his bodyguard trainer. And Mao Zedong, his bodyguard, Li Jianwu, was also Li Shu-Wen's disciple. So just by Li Shu-Wen's disciple, there are 3 who were bodyguards for very significant Chinese historic figures. Yeah, and then there are just, a bunch of them were basically famous generals at the time. And you can see it in the history books. When we study history, when we're going through the Republic era, some of these people that we read in the books, they were all Li Shu-Wen's students. Yeah, and then And then Li Shu-Wen, basically, he passed away when he was 72 years old. And there were two versions of the story. One was by the Changxianzi, the Changzhou county record, and also by Liu Yunqiao, his disciple, that Li Shu-Wen was poisoned to death, knowing that he established so many enemies, and their families or disciples would take vengeance, but they can't beat Li Shu-Wen, so they took the extreme route. Li Shu-Wen was poisoned to death. But also there's another saying by Li Shu-Wen's nephew or his adopted son from his family, his home village, Yanxian, that he actually went back home after he retired. He went back home, basically just taught little kids from the village. And one day when he was teaching little kids, he just passed away in his chair due to aneurysm. So there are two different sayings, but regardless of what it is, Li Shu-Wen was a very significant figure, controversial because he was so good at his skill of BajiShu, but also he was lack of 武德. He was very ruthless. He killed or permanently injured his opponents when it's unnecessary, which later on lead to a very stressful daily lives that he thinks people are gonna. He can't even walk through doors. So that's why a lot of times when we talk about Li Shu-Wen, we talk about his dedication, his skillfulness, his fighting styles. We rarely talk about him being a really praisable martial art master, right? So, but regardless, I believe that sometimes, especially in today's world, when we look at him, the only way to be right is that you put your opponent down, and him essentially proved that. BajiShu was some of the most effective Chinese martial art, most aggressive Chinese martial art style, and he proved it, right? Yeah, and his famous move, 猛虎鹰爬山, the fierce tiger climbs mountain. There's always saying that Li Shu would never know the feeling of striking the second strike. I want to do a quick clarification at the end of this episode, is that 猛虎鹰爬山 was his famous move, but 猛虎鹰爬山 was made up by 3 to 4 movements. So when we say he used this move, it's a sequence of movements. Well, he never had to execute the second sequence. So it doesn't mean that he just strikes someone or elbows someone, just one movement. It's a sequence of movement, 2 to 3 movements consecutive to deliver the effect, whether it's death or heavy injury to his opponent. So that's that. So in the future, besides talking about some terminologies, I will also introduce Grandmaster Liu Yunqiao and also my Shifu, Chen Changlin. All right, till next time.